like to call the board meeting to order for the Prior Lake Spring Lake Watershed District at 6:05. If all would rise to say the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, the next item here is the public comment period. If anyone wishes to address the Board of Managers on an item not on the agenda or on the consent agenda, please come forward at this time. Turn on the microphone, state your name and your address for the record, and just to know that the chair may limit your time for commenting. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to come and address the Board of Managers? Anyone interested? I see none, so we'll go on to the next item, which is the approval of the agenda. Is there any additions, corrections, or deletions on the agenda?
Mr. President, I have an addition. I would like to add item 4.2, the depredation of bluegills on carp eggs, a discussion item. And that would move the 4.2 on the old agenda to 4.3. And I would also like to add on 4.1, 4.10, a statement regarding the district administrator's performance evaluation, and that would be 4.10.
Do I hear a motion to accept the, approve the agenda as with the additions?
Yeah, that was my motion.
Oh.
I'll second.
Any comments? Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And so motion passed, the agenda's been approved. So then on to the other and old new business. And the first presentation is Paul Nelson, and co-authoring a book, Inspiring Action for Non-Point Source Pollution Control. Paul, would you like to, oh, there you are, thank you. Step forward.
Madam Chair, I'd just like to mention that Paul Nelson is the Environmental Services Program Manager at Scott County. He's one of our partners. He is directing the Scott WMO and is very active in helping us put the cost share docket together and a variety of other programs, AIS support through county dollars that come from the state, et cetera. So he's a very valuable member of our team. And we were delighted to find out he's also an author, book author now. So he's going to tell you all about it.
So, thank you for the invitation, Madam Chair and managers. This was about a 2-year effort. I won't take that long tonight, but and worked with Dr. May Davenport from University of Minnesota, and also with Troy Kufal, who you know, to put this together. And a brief presentation here. I'm going to kind of go through a little bit in the book. I left you a handout on where to find it if you are interested. But basically our bottom line is that we think the missing piece in the whole thing of non-point source pollution control is not identifying what to do, but it's how to do it. We've actually have a lot of study and so forth that has gone on, and we wrote this book because, quite frankly, we were frustrated by seeing more and more resources being dedicated to study rather than doing. And we think that there's a better way. And in this book, we try to outline it, and we have really two target audiences. One is policymakers, like you or like the state, in terms of a different way of approaching things, and then also the day-to-day staff that do things in terms of how to run organizations, how to develop those relationships with landowners to inspire action. And so what we think needs to happen is a lot of change on the land. And this quote is from Daniel Taylor, who wrote a book, and I've done a little bit of interaction with him on some work in Africa. But what he gets at here is really true. What we need is a lot of behavioral change in terms of how the land is managed, and someone needs to do it. And it needs to be rather major change because so much of our acreage has changed. The land is not the same as what it was a number of years ago. And we're setting water quality standards now that are sort of anticipated when you have an unaffected environment. Well, guess what? It's affected. Where we choose to grow food and where we choose to live, the landscape has been altered. And for example, the Minnesota River sediment strategy sets out a number of things to do. And two of those on that list are that 75% of cropland be in conservation tillage. You know, we're maybe 50, 30%. To get to 75%, there's a lot more change. And a second thing in there is we need to have 75% of land in cover crops. Well, right now, cover crops are maybe 1% at most. Huge amount of change needed. And this change is rarely rational for landowners. Those types of things cost more money. Cover crops, for example, you have to buy the seed, you have to do another pass in the field to plant it. Sometimes you have to terminate the cover crop before you can plant your main crop. So economically, it's not necessarily a rational decision. So emotion has to lead this. And in our current approaches to doing things at state and federal level, what we are currently doing is we're delivering a lot of studies. And those studies are looking for the right answer, that right answer being a project or something that gets built. And then also traditionally these studies, all this technical information, hasn't necessarily been connected with the landowners. We come out, we as scientists do studies, and we say, oh, look, we figured it out. We've got the right answer. Why aren't you people implementing it? We know the answer. It's not connected. And on top of this, us as organizations, you as the Prior Lake Watershed District and me as the county and Scott WMO, we don't have control over everything. We don't have control over all the communications. You know, the newspapers frequently say different things than we intended, or they were quoted different. People pass things along to each other that are not necessarily the message we originally delivered. We don't have total authority. Most of the land is private. And then you add on top of that that there's a whole lot of natural variability. Weather is changing, we are getting more rainfall, so forth. That what the governor said about 2 months ago is very true. He called water quality a wicked problem. And what we need to arrive at is that this wicked problem is really a social dilemma. It's not a technical issue. And that's kind of what our book is about. And I spent a lot of time talking about this up front because we feel that we kind of need to understand that this is a social dilemma rather than a technical problem before you can start talking about what to do differently. And it's been kind of hard to grasp until I found this table here and I present this to people and I've seen quite a few aha moments. And you can go home tonight and tell your spouse or other person that we talked about complexity theory. So, but it's actually not that difficult. What we have in this table here, this is from a book called Getting to Maybe, How the World is Changed. It's about a number of initiatives that were done in Canada. It's a very good read. We can divide problems into simple problems, complicated problems, and complex problems. Simple problem, baking a cake, and then I crossed theirs out and filled ours in. Maintaining a vegetative buffer, a single practice, doing that. Complicated, sending a rocket to the moon. I've changed that to building a wastewater treatment plant. Complex, raising a child, and I changed that to managing non-point source pollution. And if you read through this table, what you see and what people connect with is a complicated problem like building a wastewater treatment plant is something where rigor and science does hold a lot of sway. It is very important to get that science exactly right, and once you do, it's repeatable as well. You can build that same plant in another place. But you know, if you've raised children, that the second one doesn't necessarily turn out the same as the first one, and that's how complex problems are, and that's how watershed management is, and it's because we're dealing with that human component. You deal with one community one way, and then you try to repeat that, you're not going to get the same result out of the next community. And that's complex problems. So that's what we're looking at, and that's what we're trying to say in this book is part of the problem that we're having is because we are trying to solve the non-point source pollution problem the same way we tried to solve the point source problem, same way we did for building treatment plants. It makes sense when you're investing $500 million in a very large wastewater treatment plant to do a lot of study, to do that stuff and lock it down, because rigor is real important. But if you're dealing with a situation where it changes rapidly and each community is a little bit different, you have to have an approach that's much more flexible. And so right now you're sitting there going, wow, this is, okay, you're making me depressed. What do we do? There is some good news in complexity theory, and what they say is the thing about complex problems is that it can generally be described in 3 or 4 rules. It doesn't describe every possible outcome, but the general shape of it, how it reacts to things, is in a handful of rules. And you can think about it in terms of a flock of birds. You can visualize a flock of birds zooming around, moving together, changing course, so forth. There's 3 rules that govern how that flock of birds moves. You know, you fly equidistant, you fly the same speed, and you always turn toward the center. And if you know how that flock of birds reacts, you can actually steer it. You can make noise on one side, you can push it different ways and things like that. Same thing with other types of complex problems. You can guide them towards solutions. So within non-point pollution control, what kind of patterns are there? We go into this a little bit in the book. The first half of the book is really a lot about the theory of why people behave the way they do with respect to conservation. And there are a few types of rules that have been brought out. Eleanor Ostrom here, I've quoted her twice. She passed away a couple years ago, but she won part of the Nobel Prize a few years ago for a paper on 10 characteristics for when groups self-organize to behave sustainably. But I heard her speak at Augsburg, and her main thing was, for people to act, they need to believe that their investment of time and money will make a difference. Fairly simple thing, but we forget that. Especially as scientists, we say, we got the answer. But people don't necessarily believe this. The other thing that's really important is something that May Davenport is coming out with, and she calls it self-efficacy. And that's the belief that you have the ability to do it. You have the ability to change. You have the ability to fit conservation tillage within your business plan. And that's sometimes where we can make some help, especially the SWCD, by providing survey services. Most landowners don't know how to survey or how to build something. So that if we can build that up, that helps implement. So the other half of the book, really, we talk about this different way of doing things, and what we're proposing and what we're saying is to really be effective, we need to apply systems thinking versus what we use for wastewater or for point source is called reductive thinking, where you study something and you reduce it down into individual components and you look for the answer. Systems thinking is everything's connected, and what you're looking for are the patterns. Also have to be locally relevant, have to engage local community, build strong relationships, stay focused, learn and adapt. And this has been working for us. You know, we've been doing bits and pieces of this since I've been here 10 years or so. And the graph on the bottom is the number of landowner assistance requests that the SWCD has gotten per year over the last 10 or so years, and you can see how people coming in for assistance is increased. People are responding to this approach. It sounds really complicated when you get into systems thinking, but this is a model that May Davenport has created. that provides some structure so that you're not out there just reacting randomly to systems. And it involves working with members or individuals, working with relationships, kind of the organizational pieces and the program pieces, and we go through each of these in the book. I wanted to just show this real quickly because the whole thing about relationships and trust is really, really huge in this whole thing. And you have a resource here in the county that's amazing. Look at bar number 2. This is a survey that we did for residents along Sand Creek. And you can see the SWCD is almost as trusted as much as family when it comes to some of the decision making that folks do. At the Scott WMO, what this means is we didn't duplicate what they do. We just adopted them and let them go. But the other thing I want to point out is we look at the individual intention to act. And we know that, at least in the Scott WMO, it's pretty good. Our surveys show that 86% of people, when they're asked, that they say they're willing to do conservation. They will do it. They have the intention to do it. How do you get them to move from an intention to action? And in terms of a resource system, there are 2 tipping points, and what we see is this actually builds momentum. You can move from individual intention to act to increased collective intention. You get that tipping point when more and more people are doing that. That reinforces the individual intention to act, which then you get increased adoption. Eventually enough adoption goes on that you're seeing your water bodies improve. And all of that provides feedback loops to create what we're calling conservation momentum. You have enough going on that people are talking to each other and they see things going on and they start to believe. They start to believe that their actions will make a difference because they see their neighbors doing it. And that's what we saw in that graph. We've gone from having like 50 landowners a year walk in to having over 250 now at the SWCD anytime because people are believing. You have to marry this, though, with adaptive management. I don't know if you're familiar with adaptive management. It's usually shown as like a circle, and I refuse to do that because it's not a circle where you start out with doing something and you measure and you figure out what you're doing wrong and you adapt and you approve, and they show it as a circle. It's not a circle. It's all over the place. It's continuous learning and improvement. So you have to marry the systems thinking with adaptive management, some structure to say, how do we get better once we start learning about systems? How do we continually improve? And what I wanted to say, though, is when you marry systems thinking, understanding these patterns, along with adaptive management, it's an organized learn-as-you-go approach. And we believe that with this, you can actually achieve our outcomes faster than by doing study, project, wait for the next study, do another project. By having this continuous, ongoing cycle of things going on and learning from them and getting people on board, it's much faster. And I asked Jamie to have a video. I'll only show a few minutes of it to kind of show what we're talking about in terms of organized learning as you go. Is it going to run?
Yeah. It's
Will we have sound with it too, I guess?
It's running, yeah, and I don't know how to stop it, but I don't have sound yet, so
Okay.
I don't know if we've ever done this before.
When you take out a pen, write down the Marshmallow Challenge, and you can Google that. It's a 7-minute TED Talk video. And basically what it's about is they have teams that are to build towers out of spaghetti, tape, string, and at the end they put a marshmallow on top. And the team that builds the tallest one wins. And what they found is the teams that do the best are kindergartners because they do it by trial and error. They don't sit there and plan. They don't jockey for position. They don't do power plays. They just experiment, and they actually do the best. And it's really interesting. So if you get a chance, watch it. It's fun. Back to just, again, this graph I showed before about individual action, the 2 tipping points. So in adaptive management, what's important is to have these measures And so what we've identified is some short-term measures that match up with how do we tell whether we're affecting intention. Some other short-term measures in terms of how do we tell then are we affecting the increase in adoption of practices. And then at the end, long-term measures on the actual water quality of water bodies and whether we're making a difference. We measure all of those and have continuous feedback so you can continuously learn. So we notice we visit the docket every year. We make changes to it. That's one of the adaptive management types of things. So this is this picture is a little bit old, but this is the Sand Creek watershed and points west in Scott County, and these are the practices that we had done up through, I think this is 2013 or 14, and since then we've got a few more practices that we can stick in there. It's around 800 now what we've done in 10 years. And we're seeing the results in the water quality. This is McMahon Lake, the Secchi transparency. The top part of the graph is clear water. The deeper blue is water that's not clear, and you can see how in the last 10 years it's gone from 1 meter clarity to over 2 meters clarity now. And we're seeing a couple of the lakes, some of the streams doing this type of thing. So it's reinforcing. So really in conclusion then, what we're saying is the system thinking is interconnectedness, and it's building capacity of individuals to believe. It's building capacity in relationships. The SWCD really focuses on customer service so that people come back. It's having your organization have the capacity to continually to do these things and to learn, and then also the program capacity. And we talk about that in the book. We break down each one with the very individual components of capacity. And at the end, I referenced this book about getting to maybe. Again, I thought this was perfect. Those who are most adept at making change happen recognize local rules of interaction and leverage them to increase their potential. So the book is free. You can download it from the Freshwater Society website, and the address is on that piece of paper. And thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Paul, and congratulations to you and Troy for authoring this book. And no doubt it is a much-needed piece of paper, so thank you. Managers, have any questions for Paul?
Yeah, I have one. Paul, it's my understanding that Sand Creek is still impaired, and if so, how much?
Sand Creek is still impaired, and it will be probably for several more decades. There is again, it's one of those ones where there has been so much change. For example, there's over 9,000 acres of drained wetlands in Sand Creek. In combination that it's in this Minnesota River bluff setting where it cuts down through the bluff, so it has a high gradient. Last information I had is every sample exceeded the standard for TSS, not just 10% of the samples. So it is an extremely eroded condition, and it'll take a long time to get to something else.
Any other questions, managers? Staff? Okay, thank you so much, Paul. We'll move to the next agenda item. That's 4.2, Maggie Karshnia.
Mr. Chair, managers. So a few weeks ago, I went over to the University of Minnesota, and I met with Professor Pijaric Bayer and one of his graduate students, Joshua Poole. And Joshua is doing a study on the relationship between bluegills and carp, specifically common carp. And so last summer, he stocked 4 ponds. And of those 4 ponds, 2 of them were stocked with just spawning carp. And then the other 2 ponds were stocked with both bluegills and carp. And he found exciting results at the end of the summer. So there was 6 times more carp, like young of the years in the ponds that did not have bluegills. And so it's reducing, bluegills can reduce the population of carp exponentially. What they do is they eat the eggs and then the larvae of the carp when they're small. But the thing with the bluegills is that there's no stocking rates. So that's why I met with him and his professor, was to try to get an idea of what stocking rates we could use as one of the management tools for our carp management program. But there aren't any, and so there's a little bit more research that needs to be done. And so that's when he came and he asked us if we had any ponds that met all of his criteria. So what he's looking for is ponds that were not connected to a water body or had like a water control structure or an obstruction where you could just block it off. It needed to be fairly shallow. It needed to be fairly small and contained, had to be easily accessible for their study needs. So all of these things. And of course, I thought of the 1217 wetland. It is a contained pond that we can block off both sides on. It's very easily accessible. It's just the right size. And so that's what he's asking us for, is if we could use the pond for this study. And so my first question for him, of course, was like, well, what is this going to do to the phosphorus, right? Because that's the whole point of that wetland system, is that we want to reduce the phosphorus that's going into the lake. We don't want to stock it with carp, have them die, and put excess phosphorus in there. And so he sent me like a few different studies that they're doing now on carp and how they do phosphorus loading. And with these, with his study, the amount of carp that he'd be stocking in this pond isn't enough to create any lasting differences in phosphorus. In one of his study ponds that he did last summer, he tested the phosphorus before, like the year before he did the study, and then after, and there wasn't any significant difference, which is great news for us. And then when the young of the year die off, again, that's very minimal phosphorus loading. So this seems to be like it might be a good partnership for us, but of course we wanted to run it by the board before we said yes. So I'd like to get your thoughts on it. If you have any qualms about participating in this study with the University of Minnesota. The city of Prior Lake has also been consulted on this, and they're supportive. They actually have another pond that they would like this to be used in the study as well. It's outside of our watershed district, but that just kind of reiterates their support of this project. So if you have any thoughts or qualms, let us know.
Managers, anybody have any questions or discussions or questions they can think of? What is the other outside the watershed limits that the pond is that you're talking about?
I'm trying to remember the name of the park. There's so many parks in Prior Lake, but it is in the southeast corner of Prior Lake. It's kind of this very strange serpentine looking pond. I've never seen anything like it, but it meets all the criteria because it's not connected to any water body, so it won't infect any other lakes because the carp will die off over winter.
How long is this study going to continue? What kind of timeframes are they looking at, and then what do they do with the carp that remain in the pond after the study?
So after the study is done, they kill off the carp that are in the lake. So we would be draining the 1217 wetland, and then in the other pond that the city is looking at, that one freezes over. So the carp would die there, and the carp would die in the 1217 wetland. That was one of their requirements because they don't want to contaminate any ponds. And then this is Josh's last year, so he'll be hopefully graduating this December, and this is like the last component of his study.
So Maggie, this study would just run through the summer season, so that would be this summer is what you would plan to do the, yep.
Yep, that's correct.
I would be in favor of it. The watershed would like to be at the vanguard of these carp studies. Hopefully we can get involved with more research and more development on that, maybe even get us down the track for some grants along that way too. So I'm definitely in favor of it.
Have you consulted with our consultants at WSB and get their thoughts on it at all? If they've had any thoughts whether this would be a good thing or not a good thing? Or could see any other bad effects?
Managers, they're definitely in support of any carp research. They're actually very connected to the University of Minnesota, so they were already aware of some of this. That's where the whole bluegill discussion came up.
Mr. Chair. So the university wants more study before they will, I guess, advise watersheds and other organizations that adding bluegills into any water body that has carp would be a good thing, right? So they're looking to just further study and understand that this is a good thing. They don't have enough information to just say, all right, yep, it kind of works, so let's get some bluegills in all the lakes that have carp. How long will it take before they can, is my understanding this correctly?
Manager Howley, yeah, it's going to take a few years. This won't be the last study we'll see. So once they confirm that, yes, bluegills are really effective at this, they also have to figure out stocking rates. They have to figure out how big of a pond is too big. For example, if you have a pond that dies off like this 1217 pond, it would not be a good candidate to stock bluegills because then they'll die every year and you'll have to restock every year. So it's also taking a look at that. If, when you need an aeration system, what ponds are good candidates. There's a lot more research that needs to be done, but this just helps them get one step closer.
So this will go into a large database, and at some point, then they'll spit out some results.
Yep, that's correct.
Would there be any reason why we would put together some sort of like a contract with them? If there's any damage to the ponds, would they be responsible? If there's any, there's some of the parameters that would be of concern to the long-term functioning of the pond, our pond?
Manager Brightback, yep, we would definitely have to have some kind of agreement in place. First step is getting approval, making sure that you guys are okay with it, and then we'll be working on that contract.
And then when are you looking to hear some feedback, or when they are expecting some feedback from the watershed?
Manager Brightback, well, if nobody has any objections to it, we'd start moving forward with it. So the carp starts spawning as early as the first week of May, so they need to get on it with their planning.
I see this as a discussion only. Is there any kind of a motion you need on this, or just a nod of approval and go ahead and prepare some language?
Yeah, just a nod of approval would be great.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd certainly
Managers?
support. I think it's a good idea, Marianne. I think we ought to proceed with that.
Yeah, I'm in favor. I'd like to make sure that our pond is protected. Any other thoughts?
Ms. Chair, I guess I'd tread a little more lightly, but it seems kind of counterintuitive to what we've been focusing on. So if somebody was to make a motion to support it, I probably wouldn't support it without, a lot more strong recommendation from experts in the field. But that said, it's not like I'm going to throw up my arms and say no. It sounds like we've got support to kind of move forward, but I'm a little nervous, just for the record.
Say that I talked to Maggie about this too, and that's why we wanted to bring it to you, because it is counterintuitive. But the challenge is that we don't have enough data in the research to tell us, again, how effective is this? It's anecdotal right now, but we would be part of building that body of knowledge so that at some point we will know better what type of stocking rates we need to use. And so that will be part of our overall comprehensive carp management plan for the district. So given the fact that there's no outlet, that it's not going to affect any of the work that we're doing, that there will be a die-off, that pretty much the risk is really minimal to us. It was something that I could support.
Marianne, just one. I don't buy the counterintuitive argument. We've heard from WSB and others that, in fact, the idea of constraining the carp movement this string to put barriers up was exactly to deny them their ideal spawning areas, which were away from the bluegill populations. So no, I don't think it's counterintuitive at all. I think it's basically would kind of confirm what WSB has been telling us all along, that the barriers that'll go up this year are really about denying the carp their ideal spawning areas, which were to avoid the bluegill populations.
Why don't we get Carl's input on this? Carl's, what is your take on this?
I would say that I'm generally more in my next door neighbor's camp here in terms of just being skeptical, but I'm sure that Maggie and Diane this is the first I've heard of it, so I haven't given it a whole lot of thought other than just right here. I guess I see it as limited risk as long as the management activities of AES this year are not relying on keeping the water down. On the flip side, I see this basin is probably not, I don't see how it's scalable to necessarily thinking of it in terms of more of a place for carp to go in and breed. It's generally even more shallow than their typical breeding ground. So it's not a perfect fit for the study, but maybe if they think it's a good one, then it seems like the risk is relatively low. But as long as all those factors are thought out and make sure that there's no adverse impacts to the planned vegetation management activities of this year, seems okay.
Any other comments? I guess I would support it, but I would want some good, strong language to make sure that if there was any damage to the ponds or the structure or the integrity, that gets repaired, because I think that's, for those ponds, I think, for me anyway, that's a bigger priority, the integrity of that, than a carp. We don't need a vote on that, just an okie dokie. All right. If we are all in, or some of us, or the majority of us are in agreement that that's an okay, then the staff has permission to go ahead and proceed with that. So then we move on to the next agenda item, 4.3, the manager presentations.
I have a couple things, Marianne. Some of us frequently pick articles out of the paper, out of periodicals, newsprint, and Xerox them to kind of go over them with the public. Marianne had one that was in the Sunday paper, Star Tribune just a few days ago, and it's about the situation with White Bear Lake. It's a classic situation of how the suburban towns surrounding the lake are pulling water from that would normally be accumulated in White Bear Lake, and has drastically lowered the level of that lake to the great detriment of lakeshore owners in terms of their docks and their use of their lakes. It's a very interesting article. I think it was, 2 days ago in the Star Tribune. So I encourage everyone to get online. It's the White Bear Lake case could affect well users statewide. It's of course is in the courts, but I think it'd be interesting for all to take a look at. Another article that I wrote was, if anyone is familiar with a highly destructive, invasive seed called Palmer amaranth, that was found in some grass seeds in Minnesota in a few limited areas. They now have located the seed company that had it, and they've been able to stop it. Palmer amaranth has done some horrendous damage, especially in the south to crop fields, cotton, that type thing. It has tens of thousands of seeds per plant. It can grow up to a height of 8 feet tall. It's a woody plant that is so dense that even farm equipment can't cut it with a mechanized sickle. So it's hopefully, fortunately, it's been stopped before it gets into the population here. Of course, this had to do with the seedings that were going to be used in the buffer areas that with the governor's plan. The plant, like I said, can produce up to 250,000 seeds per plant, up to 8 feet tall, with a wooden stem that's so thick that it damages farm equipment that tries to mow it down. So hopefully that was gotten ahead of. I have one more here. Pentair, as you know, Pentair is a leader nationwide, worldwide in water conditioning, water systems. They are launching a 5-year, $5 million clean water project in Honduras in Central America. And there has been a huge problem in that country with water quality, causing a lot of illnesses and deaths amongst the Honduras people. They have a 5-year, $5 million clean water project. And of course, with its home offices here in Minnesota, we can be very proud of them too, as they try to dig wells and get water systems that can clean the water they do have. The problem is the water they have now is contaminated, and it's causing dysentery and such terrible, miserable ailments such as that. That's what I have, Madam President.
Thank you.
And if I may, just a couple items. I sat on the Water Surface Use Management Task Force for the last few years. That's resulted in some significant changes to the ordinances for boat operating on the lakes this summer. The group has produced a kind of a placard which will be displayed at the ramps next month. They'll be going, and they'll be hanging on the County 21 bridge as well. So significant change, especially on Spring Lake, where there will be a 150-foot no-wake area delineated there, and a couple other changes on Pryor as well. So that will be disseminated. I think the first public viewing will be at the Spring Lake Association's meeting, which is on the 23rd, April 23rd. The other thing I just mentioned, I've been doing the DNR boat safety class for the youth for years. The DNR is stopping. This will be the last year that class is offered. The DNR is going to only offer that course online going forward. So if anybody's interested, Saturday, April 22nd will be the last opportunity locally to get that course taught.
Thank you, Woody. Anybody else? I have one. Last month's CAC, Citizens Advisory Committee, which is part of the Watershed District, had Mary Hedrick from WSB, our consultants, on the Carp management program. There was really a very good attendance, and she had a wonderful presentation on the radio tagging and the pit tag, and actually why we're monitoring the carp and where they're found, and just a whole broad spectrum of the program. And I think everybody was delighted to learn more, and you know, it goes back to raise the water and all boats float. So everybody learns a little bit, and we all are better citizens for it. So that was a very good meeting, very well attended. That's what I have. So with that, we'll go on to the next agenda item, 4.4, Programs and Projects Update.
Okay, as always, we start off with the level of Prior Lake. We are getting closer to dropping down below the weir, but not quite yet. Now with some rain in the forecast, we might bump it up a little bit. But yeah, we're at 902.54. We just today, actually, with a lot of help from the city of Prior Lake, Brian Welch, he helped me program the website so we can now view the discharge, the flow coming out of Prior Lake. So under the water level graph, you'll see a discharge graph as well. So both of these graphs, I should just mention, are from the last year. So it's one full year of data that you're looking at. So this is, again, the level of the lake. So you'll see it goes down below the weir in August or so. And then on the discharge graph, so like I said, we just put this up today, and that red line is the minimum valid discharge, and the orange is the maximum valid discharge. So that means we've created a rating curve that we know what the flow is between that level, and if it's above or below those lines, it's not really accurate. Like, obviously we don't have negative flow during that time, but that's just that the way that we have it set up today. We just, like, a couple hours got this figured out. So make sure that you understand that when you're looking at the graph, or it could be a little bit confusing. We also did this for Spring Lake. So again, the graph from the last year, the level, and the flow coming out of Spring Lake over the last year. So the flow, you can see from this graph, it has not stopped flowing out of Spring Lake over the whole last year. Possibly during the winter it froze up for a little bit, but we don't have that verified. And
Excuse me, Jamie, can I ask a question? Yeah. The flow there, where it says 20, 0, 40, that's cubic feet per second?
Yep, cubic feet per second.
So that's the amount or the velocity?
Yeah, it's takes into account, the area and the velocity. So yeah, cubic feet every second.
The whooshing through.
The flow.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And then we also just installed another level logger on Pike Lake. So there's a graph for Pike Lake as well on the website, and then we're going to have Fish Lake. Hopefully this week we'll get that one up there, so you'll be able to see the level of those two lakes on our website as well. We probably won't have a graph for the discharge, as we don't have a relationship for those lakes and the flow coming out of them.
Shortly after our last board meeting, we had some good news come in. So we received the CPL grant through the Minnesota DNR. And this was a grant that we applied for, I think, last November, and we just recently received it. And what we'd like to do with this one is install an innovative style carp barrier, which Mary might have mentioned at the CAC meeting. At the desilt pond, we had a few of the carp that we had radio tagged in Spring Lake go over there to spawn. And so we knew that this was an area that we wanted to concentrate on making a barrier. But the problem with traditional style barriers that you see in the picture on the left is that if you get enough flows, they tip over. They require a lot of maintenance because stuff, as you can imagine, gets caught all the time on these and blocks the flow. And so you're always going out there removing them and that sort of thing. And so what Tony and Mary had come up with was this drum style barrier that they had seen used in other applications. And so it rolls basically. So it's kind of like a little drum or a barrel that rolls. And then we are having a fabricator put little holes in there so that water could just keep on funneling through. And when they cut the holes in the drum style, they're going to like push back a little bit of the metal so that the flow will actually push it along and help move it. And so if vegetation gets caught, it'll just kind of be kicked over to the other side, which is great. So it'll require less maintenance, a little bit more visually appealing, and then we're also putting in 2 permanent cement foundations on each side of the stream so that we can easily take them out and put them back in. And then if Gary Stevens, who owns the property by the diesel pond, if he needs to drive over it with lawnmowers or any equipment, he can just easily take them out too, which is great. And then, so in addition to that barrel-style roller barrier, we also put in for the grant for another pit receiver. So we have all those pit-tagged fish that are swimming around Spring Lake, and we're going to put one of the receivers at this diesel pond to see how successful this barrier style really is. And so if it is successful, if it does have as low maintenance as we were hoping, then we can use them in other locations. So the DNR awarded us $18,000 to try this out, and we're just very happy about that. And then just another thing to announce is that we did do the prescribed burn last Wednesday, April 5th. It was very successful. If you go out there, you're going to see black edges around the wetlands. It was a really solid burn. We were kind of thinking it might be a little bit patchy because of the weather and because the site hasn't reached full maturity yet, but it burned really well. And I actually do have a video of some of the burn that we took. If I can get this up. So it's about a 30-second video, but you can kind of see it going. So there was a crew out there, I think of like 8 or 10, and they just slowly burned around the wetlands. They used the drip torch that she's using to kind of light it along the way. And they did a back burn on it so that they could control it. So, but that's what it looked like at the end. All the edges are burned. They did a really great job, and we're really happy with AES.
So, managers, we're continuing on with updating 2 really important manuals for our Prior Lake Outlet Channel. One is the Operation and Maintenance Manual. This is the one that was recommended to be updated in the flood study, and that is the one that has our procedure for opening the low flow gate in it. We have been working with the Technical Advisory Committee of the cooperators, and then the cooperators themselves will actually be hearing a presentation on this on Thursday at their meeting. We are hoping that they will support the changes that have been recommended by the Technical Advisory Committee and staff. And so then if that's the case, it will be flowing or go up the flagpole, I guess, at the Department of Natural Resources. They have their procedure that they have to use in order to approve it. And then once they've approved it on a tentative basis, it goes out to the public for their review and comment. So overall, it'll still take several months for that to happen. But once that does, then we at the district will have a really good idea of how we manage all these different water levels that we've been seeing over the last few years. The meeting with the cooperators, as I said, is on the 13th of this month, this week. And the Memorandum of Agreement is a document that was last updated in 2006. The cooperators will have an opportunity to weigh in on major policy issues that have been remanded to them from the Technical Advisory Committee, and they're really important discussion will take place there. We're hoping that we will resolve a lot of the policy issues, and we'll still have to go back and meet with them again. I would assume that we'll meet with the Technical Advisory Committee on and iron out some of the things. It's a long process. It's probably going to take longer than the Operation and Maintenance Manual, but we're well on our way to make those changes. For education and outreach, periodically we get requests from schools asking us to come over and talk to their classes. I was invited to come to the Westwood Elementary School. It was 3rd and 4th graders, and they have a terrific teacher who has been given carte blanche to do an innovative curriculum, and her focus is on water issues. So I try to explain to them what our watershed district does, why it's important. There you can see I'm talking about the water cycle. And we did have people children that were very interested in carp. One of the young men said, I understand understand that you're paying $25 for each carp that's taken out of the water. And I said, no, not exactly. It's $25 for the carp that have the tag on them for the antenna. So not all the other ones. And then we talked about what to do when you take a carp out of the water and dispose of it properly, use it for compost or whatever, but don't leave it on somebody else's property. So they were a great group of kids. We did 2 classes there. And Maggie will also now be talking to the Greenwood Elementary School in a few weeks, another request, and she'll be doing something quite different, but we're delighted to be a part of the educational community.
Any questions, managers? That was a very good video, very good presentation for our projects, and thank you guys for all your hard work. No, excuse me, Charlie?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Question, reading through the Raymond Park project, if I remember correctly, maybe it was 2 meetings ago, right? We had to work through some contract language, or it kind of stalled. Can you just update us on, where we're at on the Raymond Park?
Madam Chair, managers, so we're still working on that draft agreement. So since that time, I believe, we realized that Spring Lake Township also owns a piece of Raymond Park. So we've been working on 2 different agreements, but we've added a time frame that they have to keep everything in place. We decided on 10 years. So after we complete this project, they're obligated to keep it in its natural state for 10 years.
Thank you. And my second question was, at the fecal chloride desoak pond, there has been talk, and I'm sorry I'm not looking at what we budgeted there, but some minor improvements to the outlet there might increase its operational efficiency. Just wondering, are we looking at kind of having Carl draw up something for us on that, or where are we at looking at increasing the efficiency of that based on an outlet update?
Manager Hawley, we did not include it in our budget, so we're not intending to do anything about it at this time.
Thank you.
Any other questions? If not, we'll move forward to the next agenda item, 4.5, the Living Hope Lutheran Church, and that will be, there's an attachment and there'll be a vote.
Madam Chair, managers, so we received a request from Living Hope Church to do their easement amendments. And so if you recall from the last board meeting, when the permit project was asked to go through, we had an easement on the property that was going to be affected by it. And so at the direction of the managers, Living Hope Church decided to submit that easement amendment request, which is preemptive to the hopefully approved permit. So just, again, a little background on it. So if you went by the water tower off of Highway 42 and went north on Highway 18, it's Living Hope Church is right in that neighborhood. The easements are in red on this map. And then on this other side, you can see the areas in red. So the easement in the first slide, or in the first map, the easement is outlined in blue. And the areas that are going to be affected by this upcoming development project are shaded in red. And so those are the areas that they're proposing to remove from the existing conservation easement as is. And so a little bit of history on this easement too. So when this easement first came to us, it was part of a permit project back in 2002. So the Living Hope Church were just developing their property at that time. They had delineated 2 wetlands on the property that we were protecting, along with a 30-foot average buffer around them. And so these are the 2 areas that we were protecting. But now, many years later, they redelineated those wetlands, and they found that Just the north one is what they call like an incidental wetland, so it was man-made, that sort of thing. So, but with wetland delineations, when you delineate them 1 year, it could be different 5, 10 years down the road, which is the case that we see right here. But they still have conservation values that we're protecting. When we have an easement, once we sign the document, we no longer have authority over it in a regulatory capacity. It's a proprietary, an ownership capacity. So whether or not the wetlands are delineated the same, it always stays the same. And this, again, as we've been through all this before, it protects both parties so that we're not in constant debate over where that wetland line is, over what the values are, and that sort of thing. It protects both of us. And so, but we do have an amendment policy that allows them to ask for this request. And we do see this as reasonable. They would like to expand the property. They have limited opportunities to do so. And, so they're adding this additional parking lot and expanding to their building. So they worked a lot with me and Carl on this, on trying to find a new area that would have the same conservation values. So it's the water quality values that we're protecting, the storage values. And so what we came up with is the map on the right, which is the green areas. So these areas are also like lower areas that somewhat follow the contour. They did add another 116 feet. Their original calculations that I mentioned in here was 109 feet, but then they looked at everything again and corrected it, and it is 116 additional square feet that they're adding with this amendment. In addition to that, they're also going to take any of the disturbed areas that are in the easement. So one of them is by the proposed addition in the upper right. They're going to restore a portion of that to native prairie, as well as some of the area in the swale that's kind of double shaded on the right. So any areas that are disturbed by construction, they're restoring, but not only that, they're going to have a 3 to 4 year restoration plan that they're going to agree to with us, that they'll be bound to make sure that it's a good restoration, because as we all know, with the 1217 wetland, that first year doesn't look so good. You need to have constant, diligent maintenance on that to get it to where it needs to be. So this amendment is removing portions of the project, but overall we're having a conservation square footage gain of 116 square feet. They are doing restoration on areas that are disturbed to enhance it and to improve its habitat value, which currently is fairly low. And we are asking at this time that the board move forward with accepting this easement amendment request.
Any managers, any discussion, any questions?
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'm going to need help with this one, quite a bit of help. In '02, it was delineated as a wetland. In 2016, it was not. And that was approved through a TEP panel and everything, and is there any debate does anybody believe that these two areas are wetlands anymore?
Manager Howley, I'm going to punt that question over to Carl over there.
I figured you would.
Madam Chair, Manager Howley, well, one, we should say even the wetland delineation line that existed originally back with the permit is much smaller in area and towards the central portion of the easement. So the areas that are being proposed to be impacted weren't and never were delineated as wetland. That's kind of a more interior to the easement. The difference really, it's wetland delineations have varying degrees of due diligence, and I think the first one there were certainly indicators, hydrology, soils, and maybe to a lesser extent the vegetation that existed, and it classified as a wetland. So the argument that was being made in the new delineation, the more recent delineation, is that one of those at least indicators of wetland, the hydrology was from an artificial or a anthropogenic source, i.e. the county created a stormwater pond associated with Crest Avenue that's kind of hard to see in these figures, but it's along well, it really doesn't matter to, yeah, generally where Charlie's pointing on his figure, but under the new paved section that you can see that's being proposed. And that was in large part the argument made with this new delineation, that the hydrology that was being delivered to the lowland area was a diversion from what formerly wasn't there, and the TEP agreed with that, and therefore said that this area under the new delineation is incidental, even though it has the qualifications as a wetland. It was because it was human change that resulted in that wetland.
And so the follow-up question is, I presume the county knows that their stormwater system that used to go to this pond that was built under the new parking lot is getting redirected into a pretreatment basin and then going into we'll call it the old wetland, which now that it's going to get a lot more water may turn into a wetland again, right? And the county's okay with this, and there's vacations of the easement, and the county's going to maintain the system and the wetland, and where does that play into all of this development?
Madam Chair, Mr. Manager Hawley, the correspondence that we've seen, and I don't know if Maggie's seen something more recent, is that the county is fine with the abandonment of their easement that exists over the pond, the filling of their basin, and the management of the stormwater from the county road system within this integrated system that's being proposed on site. The extent to which maintenance, I haven't directly seen acceptance, but that's one of, not in terms of the easement decision, but in terms of the permit decision that's still outstanding. And, the permit wouldn't be issued until such time that it's clear to the district that the system is being maintained and by whom. Our assumption is that it's going to be the church, that ultimately it's going to probably be the church that burden is being directed to, since they're proposing these changes and have stormwater management requirements as a result.
Okay, that answers my questions. Thanks.
I think that probably answers a lot of our questions. Thank you, Carl, for that very good explanation. Are there any other questions or comments on this? Any other comments you would like to add to it, Maggie? No. What do we want to do as managers now? Do we want to go ahead and vote? So do we need a motion to accept the recommendation of, let's see, what was the recommendation here? Option 1, approve the application subject to the conditions noted herein. What were the conditions that were noted under option 1?
Madam Chair, managers, so the conditions are that an agreement be signed and recorded in the county recorder's office that binds the church and future landowners to complete and fully establish the native prairie on the disturbed areas as a result of the construction for a period of 4 years. And so this is just something that'll bind future landowners. If it's a temporary thing that happens, we don't typically put it into a permanent easement agreement, so this would be like a separate agreement that'll be signed. The second condition is that the easement amendment and prairie establishment agreement must be completed and recorded no later than August 1st. This just gives us a little bit of time to fix up any of the title issues that may be on record and to just negotiate any of the finer terms.
These are the same requested actions that were noted at the last meeting that we're moving forward on then.
Madam Chair, managers, so this is going to be a separate vote item from the permit. So this will just be for the easement. So it'll just be approving the amendment request subject to those 2 conditions. And then next we'll have to bring up the permit project and vote on that next.
so I entertain a motion. Does anyone want to make a motion that we accept the district staff's recommendation?
I'll make a motion that we accept the easement amendment request on A569827 for Living Hope Lutheran Church and School easement.
Do I hear a second?
Yes, I'll second that motion.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Motion passed for the, for that, that's, for the easement. Okay, now we vote on the permit. So is there a motion that we vote for the permit?
So moved.
Is there a second on that?
I'll second that.
Any more discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion passes for the permit. So that brings us to the next item on the agenda, 4.7, permit 1702 Zinron Avenue improvements projects in Savage.
Madam Chair, managers, so this is another of those permit projects that was brought to us by the City of Savage. This project is located right along Highway 13. A map should be up on your screen. If you look to the left, you can see where it's located at. So the portion of Zinron Avenue that's going to be under construction is north of 150th Street and to the south and east of Highway 13. This project is going to affect approximately 690 linear feet of Zinron Avenue. It includes converting a rural section of roadway into an urban section by widening the road and installing storm sewer, curb, and gutter. Something kind of interesting about this site specifically is that we were contacted early on by the City of Savage to help them kind of brainstorm this project. And you can see on the map to the right, we do have another conservation easement in this area. And the reason for that is for drainage. You can look on the right and to the left. There's both stormwater ponds and natural wetlands, and there wasn't really much room for them to do any stormwater management on this site, so we had to work kind of creatively. This permit project affects 3 of our rules. The first is for land disturbance, and they meet all of the district requirements for that. Another rule that gets triggered is the erosion and sediment control rule, to which they've provided us an acceptable erosion control plan for. And then the last is our Rule D for stormwater management, which leads us to the limited conditions of this site. So because there wasn't really anywhere to do any stormwater management, they decided to do something that was kind of different on this site. So if you had taken a look at the plan set that was in with the board packet, they're proposing to do this storage and filtration device underneath the road. So if I go back to the first one, so where this is going to be located at, it's right here, kind of where the Zinran road name is, so right in this area. And I might have Carl, actually, since he's here, explain a little bit how that system works, because it's kind of an interesting portion of this permit application.
Madam Chair, managers, this page that you're looking at right now, if you look in the top left, that's kind of looking down, bird's eye view, plan view, and you see a bunch of pipe kind of running into between the 2 black dots that are within the road profile. There's a series of pipes, and then around those pipes is rock. So if you switch your view down to the bottom right, that kind of cuts a cross section through, it would be west to east, east to west, through that feature proposed underneath the roadway. And the way this is set up to function is all the storm sewer is routed to one low manhole that diverts all the runoff to this. And as you look at the picture, the kind of the 2 or 3 white circles are pipes. running to and out of that cross-section. And then the kind of the hatched or speckled area around the figure is rock that's kind of a wash rock. So both of those areas are storage layers. The larger pipe in the middle is where the water first comes into and is designed such that it's kind of the primary pre-treatment in addition to a sump manhole upstream of that. And then as that fills up, it's also connected to those other two smaller pipes. And then as those fill up, then the water is also, all those pipes are perforated and soak into the rock around that. So the whole feature is really just designed as a subsurface pond. And then once the capacity of that is exceeded, there's an overflow structure and the water would continue would bypass the system and go to where it does right now, to the west side, kind of the southwest corner of 13 and Zinran. So this is designed intending to be for the water that gets trapped in here. The next part of the feature below that storage layer I was describing is you can kind of maybe somebody can point to kind of the filtering layers in the bottom right and the bottom left. So that is a sand filter with drain tile that again comes into and out of the figure, as well as is tied and goes over to two locations. You can see back up in the top left. Maybe you can read it or not, but it says head wall, and those were those drain tiles with daylight back down into the wetland. Yep, a little to this. Yep, there's one, and then there's another one to the south. So all the water that's stored in that rock storage layer is filtered for higher removal efficiency rates and then discharged to the wetland. So that's where you're getting your treatment. There is unfortunately no real capacity here for any sort of infiltration or volume reduction. The soils are very tight, clays in some instances. So we're really looking and focusing on filtration. So that's how the system is designed. I don't know if you want me to speak to performance to standard now, or if that. So in terms of meeting district standards, and this is based on a review, we had original plans submitted with the application, and we got revised plans yet today to attempt to address those items that are listed as conditions in the recommended action. The proposed stormwater management plan does meet district rate control requirements, and then I would say meets and exceeds the volume standard, which, because of the poor soils, district rules allow filtration to serve as a surrogate to volume control, where infiltration is just not feasible. So that is also met. There still needs to be some minor tweaking, and I have some ideas that I can speak to Singh after the meeting if he can stick around, or if not, I can follow up with Jesse. But we're really still trying to attempt to filter the whole runoff volume delivered from a 2-year event, and we're at about 60% right now of that volume, 62%. And I still think there's opportunity to maximize, not necessarily with adding additional rock or storage or pipe, which I guess is a possibility too, but just looking at that control structure a little bit more closely. And what I'm noticing is there's more storage in this feature than required by standard, but some of it's positioned higher than the water is ever bouncing in that structure for the 2-year event, so it's not necessarily effective. So either A, managing the outlet control structure a little bit differently, or B, managing the cross-sectional, kind of scrunch it down and push it wider if possible. But certainly the city knows the other utilities in the corridor better than we do. Hasn't been purview to our review at this point. So some additional dialogue is necessary on the water quality front, at least to maximize the ability. But even if we realize that there are additional constraints, utilities, whatnot, within the system, district rule does in this situation for road reconstruction, utilize language in terms of, meeting the rule to the maximum extent practicable kind of language. So I just want to have you keep that in mind, that the rules don't mandate meeting that last standard, but we want to still try to work with the city to maximize and get the most bang for the buck for this design.
Thanks, Carl.
Managers, any questions, or did you have more comments, Maggie?
Just a small one. Included in the packet was also just a request to allow the city of Savage to make any small changes to the easement as required by this project. And Carl did an analysis, and we discovered that there is no real conservation negative value impacts because of this project. So we would like to, approve their request to make these small minor easement modifications for this project. And then there are some other conditions for the permit as well. So at this time, staff is recommending option 1, which is to approve the application subject to the conditions. And the conditions that Carl mentioned are listed in number 1. And then a couple of the other conditions to note is that we're going to be requiring a security deposit or a surety from the contractor, like we do with the City of Prior Lake projects. It just kind of gives us a little bit of a leg up when we're doing our inspections, and it helps us with enforcement. And so they'd be providing $1,000 per acre of disturbed area for that surety. And then the other thing to note is that we're going to be asking the City of Savage for a letter that indicates their acceptance of the maintenance responsibility for this subsurface storage and filtration system. All the other conditions are fairly standard, though.
Thank you, Maggie. My question, I have a question for Carl, and I guess that would be, how does that not get filled up with sediment, and is there a way to maintain it if it does, or does it?
If we could go back to that cross-section. This is kind of the second rendition of this. And we did have some concern at this, and I feel like the city has addressed it well. If we look to the bottom left figure, you'll see these shapes that kind of go from a surface down to a certain depth, kind of the tall cylinders. The one that goes to the lowest elevation is where the water would come to that structure first. And that's a sump manhole. So that's, a fairly standard practice. It's not the best in terms of dealing with any sort of even, certainly not fines, but it takes out the gross particles. But that first larger chamber, if you look to direct your attention to the figure on the bottom right, that largest white circle is a pipe of a larger diameter that serves as the primary pretreatment area. So you will get that filling up and essentially acting like the primary ponding area for stuff to settle out before it can migrate to the next 2 pipes. But all of those are accessible by 2 structures, 2 manholes on either end of the system, so that they can be cleaned out and maintained before, to remove that sediment material before it's able to migrate out into the rock storage layer, and then finally the filtering layer.
Thank you, Carl. That was a very good explanation. Any other questions?
Just a quick one. Thank you, Marianne. I don't know, Carl, maybe Singh knows this. So this project is, board approval on the permit was required by May 22nd. I assume this project is planned for this summer. Is that when this is going to kick off?
My recollection from talking to Jesse was that this was going to be June construction, planned for June construction starting. Is that, Mr. Singh is nodding his approval.
Madam Chair? Question, what do I have? A couple things. And Carl, you probably don't know this, so this is a question for Sang. Does the city of Savage have any other underground systems in public roadways, or is this your first one?
Thank you, Madam Chair, watershed managers. It's actually kind of weird. I've never been in this position. I worked for the city of Prior Lake for 8 years, and I've kind of always been sitting in that spot over there. So, this is a first as far as a system like this within the city. We recognize the need to meet watershed rules and requirements, and so this is a tight project, and it's. And there's been some challenges within this little, it's only 700 feet in length, and there has been some challenges. So it's a state aid route. We're also going through that process as well as through some of this, the watershed requirements. So it has been a challenge. But we have reviewed this as far as the system itself and maintenance itself with maintenance staff to make sure we did get their input on that. And it took some how should I say it, encouragement, I guess, for them to kind of accept this, and they did provide input in terms of how to maintain the system. So
Good. That was going to be my follow-up, because I deal with cities and they don't want anything to do with it, and I think they're going to have to eventually bite the bullet. So I'm happy to see you guys or at least your public works staff has at least given you a thumbs up on this one. So it looks good. I can't really tell from the details. Are we at least raising the drain tile a little bit and doing some scarification at the bottom to at least maybe get some infiltration, although it'll be minor? Are we at least doing something to?
I maybe have to go back to maybe Carl and have Jesse, kind of evaluate that. I think if it's necessary. I'm not sure of the details of the requirement itself, but that's something that if Carl feels the need, we can certainly look at that.
Managers, to just address that question, the drain tile is perched slightly in that last filtering layer profile. There is not at this point any mention of scarifying, just because it is, some of it's coming back as the, what do you call it, glemmed clays or whatever. It's some pretty bad stuff in terms of there wouldn't be any benefit to scarification.
Okay, good, thank you. I always get forced into doing that, so that's the reason why I ask. And my last question was, are these the wetlands that with the big project on 13 where there was, sediment blowing into them and maybe some fines from the MPCA, or are those different wetlands in the area? And I guess if these are the wetlands, have they been cleaned up and everything accounted for there?
Manager Howley, these are like the north wetlands, that one right there. The overflow that came off from that Highway 13 project, we had that coffee-laden water, that was all in this area. We haven't heard about, I know that the city had a plan, but I can't remember where they're at with that. Do you remember it all saying?
Certainly, I can touch a little bit on it. We have reviewed you can recall, I think there's a length of pipe that's required to come out of that basin that's on top there. There is some erosion issues there that's going on down the stretch of that ditch along 13 there. So the thought is, I think we've met with our consultant as well as the city of Prior Lake to kind of review that a little bit and see what else we can do. Maybe even, looking at some type of lengthening that pipe a little bit further down, perhaps, and some type of structure, provide that additional kind of a pop-up feature, I guess, would do instead of having that velocity that's coming out through there. So there's continues to be flow. The vegetation itself is not getting established along that route, and so that's been a concern. And I think we've been kind of looking at that to address that issue. So.
Any other questions? I guess I have a question or a comment. So these easements with the road construction, and there'll be some demolition, there'll be tree removals. Is there going to be a replacement plan or a vegetative plan after this is constructed?
Madam Chair, so you're just talking about just strictly the easement areas?
Well,
or?
I guess either in the easement areas or along the road construction where that's disturbed. And I guess I would be more interested in at least our easement areas.
Sure. There is a vegetation plan in place, and for our easement areas, it'll affect a little bit of the areas we'll have riprap where there wasn't riprap before, but it really affects our easement very, very minimally. But those areas will be restored to, I believe, some kind of native DOT mix.
I have a question. Are there going to be any tree removals involved in this?
I might pass that to Sang.
As part of the project, yes, there will be. We're also looking at some relocation of certain trees within the HOA itself, some of the townhome HOA, so there will be some tree replacement, or I say removal, I should say.
And they're going to be replaced, or they're going to be just removed and that's it?
Removed. A little different with the HOA, I believe, as it's within some are within their property. So we're kind of working with the HOA in terms of relocation of those pine trees. So, but anything within the right of way there, particularly on the east side, we are putting a sidewalk through there in order for Aspen Academy School, some of that neighborhood to try, for pedestrian mobility through there. So there are going to be some impacts definitely on that side.
Just curiosity, was this originally going to be done if the Savage and Prior Lake could have gotten together back, 2 years ago and agreed on that particular route for a revamping to help with pedestrian safety and traffic flow over to the new high school?
Actually, I just had a conversation with Larry this week. I said if we would have chose Sinran as an option, I wouldn't be going through this process. But it is. I mean, it's we would have done this project obviously with that Trunk Highway 150th Street project if that was the chosen option. But again, that was not. And the case with this is it's still a rural section. We have to essentially bring it up to state aid standards and provide the necessary access, especially with the expansion of the Aspen Academy, where they get the main access off of Zinran. We do need to improve that roadway. So
a huge extra expenditure by the city of Prior Lake to get their way. But all right, thank you.
So managers, do I hear a motion to accept or on the permit 1702 for Zinran Avenue improvements?
Madam Chair, so moved with the stated conditions in the staff report.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Permit 1702 for Zinran Avenue improvements has been accepted. So now we go to the next agenda item, which is 4.8, the impoundment tour discussion only, and there's some attachments in your board packet. So Diane, she left. Okay, well, I guess I'll start out with this, and then when Diane returns, we probably all have some comments too.
Starts on page 45, right?
45, yep. That was a little memo that I put together, and this is a possible tour out to the Bois de Sioux watershed district that we've made contact with the administrator out there to look at some of their impoundments for water storage in their fields and to help reduce flooding. And I've talked to Linda Vavre. She's one of the managers out there. And I guess I was very excited to think about taking a tour. They would customize a tour for us to look at some of these areas and discuss, and of course it did take them a long time, and this North Ottawa project in the Bois de Sioux. And Diane at the legislature day there with Maud talked to Michelle Swenson, who is the district administrator out there, and she also was kind kind of thinking that maybe would be a good thing, that the managers or staff or any of our partners would be, or maybe anyone from the Farmer-Led Council would be interested in. We've just, because it's just discussion, we've just started thinking about, well, if we went, how long, because it's a while to drive out there. If we would do this in one day, if we would do an overnight, if we would just rent a big van and all pile in and drive out there. But they are would be very accommodating to us to do a one-on-one tour, so we could ask particular questions. So, oh, Diane, you're back. Would you like to add in on that, please?
Madam Chair, I'm sorry, I missed part of that conversation. But yes, this is actually something that we've talked to the Bois de Sioux folks for a couple years, actually. And when we were at Legislative Day, I believe that was last year, we talked to a couple of the district administrators about their luck with doing impoundments and other ideas that they had, and they've kind of written the book on it. And so we talked about it then, that we'd love to have the opportunity to see what they've done. So it's kind of like at our door right now, and so we thought we'd ought to just pass it by you and see what you think.
I have a question. Do we have access either through maybe the school district or the city to a large van, like one of them extra long vans that have 4 bench seats across? So as maybe we could, I don't know. And the other question is, are you interested in bringing staff along, or is this more of a manager thing, or what's your thought line along that?
Mr. Chair, Madam Chair, managers, my thought would be certainly managers and some staff.
Okay, because it's 3 hours each way, I was told, and it's going to take up a full day of office time too.
Absolutely, yes. That's one of the challenges. It's quite a ways
Yeah.
away. So we'd like to be really organized on our tour, so we make the most of it.
But if we could get the right vehicle, we could probably take, I don't know, 3 people to a bench seat, 4 bench seats, 10 or 12 people in one vehicle, if that'd be possible.
Yeah, we could check out, what the options are. Maybe it's also just renting a van.
I don't know if the city has a van like that or not,
Yeah.
or even a school district.
I don't know either. We can check it out.
All right.
Any other questions or thoughts on this?
I'd love to go, but that's our oldest granddaughter's graduating on Friday, and we're probably heading down there. So that date won't work for me.
Oh, well, we don't have a date. We don't have it. No, we don't have a date. We would kind of take a survey and figure out a date that would work, and then get a hold of. Oh, there is a scheduled tour on June 1st, but that one I don't think will work for us, because that's one that they've already scheduled. We would have to go to Fargo and then back down, and it would involve other people, and I think we want a custom tour that would be just for us. So we could figure out a date, and they would work with us and accommodate. So back and forth a few times, we could figure out a date that would work for everybody.
Yeah, I'm fine with it.
Okay, so Diane, you and I can get our heads together and figure out where we go from here?
Sounds good. Thank you.
Madam Chair, one thought, and this is a fine idea, I would support it and think people should go out there, but, thinking about what Paul said earlier tonight, and our folks from our last meeting, the Farmer-Led Council, they're the ones who have to get invested in a project such as this. As Paul said, we could come up here and say, this is a great idea, we got the solution, now why don't you go and do it? We need the people who are going to go and do it, who have to be part of it, to see things like this. So I think we need to take extraordinary efforts to and make it convenient for, some of these Farmer-Led Council representatives to see if they would be interested in coming, I think. I think that's where we'll get our most bang for our buck, if you will.
Right, I guess I was kind of thinking along those same lines, like Paul from the Farmer-Led Council, or one or two, and then I don't even know if maybe Troy would be interested, or somebody from the SWCD.
Madam Chair and managers, I think that that's an excellent idea, and I'm wondering, the planting season is pretty much open after, or they're doing planting in June, May and June, and so when generally would that be a good time for them?
It's really July, so we have our meetings, January, March, July, and September, or November, because those are the best times. So if you wanted to do this tour, I would suggest probably July.
Does anyone know, are there any videos that go with this project? Any electronic media that we could access to?
That's a good question. I'm sure there probably is on the Bois de Sioux Watershed District website. They've got a lot of different information, so that would be, I would like to visually see it, but I think that's a really good source to start.
Yeah, and I would stay away from May or June. That's definitely planting season. You're talking July is probably after the 4th of July, the week or two after that. Mid-July would probably be the safest bet.
Sounds good. All right. Any other questions on that, or we'll just move along to the 4.9, and that's Carp tournament, and another discussion only.
Madam Chair, managers, we have the Carp tournament on our schedule for May 20th. It's supposed to be a night tournament. We haven't had the opportunity to hear back from Mr. Tandy to see what he has in mind. He does know that we are willing to offer prize money, but that's our only involvement at this point.
I have a couple questions on that. Now, what prize money are we going to be offering? And if that's the only investment, we aren't going to be putting in any more money for staff time or that type thing, because I got over the top last time. I guess my thoughts on this, we can go through $2,000 or $3,000. I see Commissioner Beer sitting here. You might want to hear this. We can go through $2,000 or $3,000 on a carp tournament real quick. That's half of a seining. Of a netting, and it's not even close to the yield. Now, there is an education and a PR value, and I certainly agree with that too. But Thane needs to step up on this thing. There's no doubt about it. Advertising, planning. Also, what about now? My understanding is this is going to be the same day, the same evening as WMO is doing theirs on Cedar Lake, or have I got that wrong?
I thought it was the night after.
Is it? That's what I'm wondering. Is it? I don't know.
Not sure.
Madam Chair, I think they're doing it on Friday, and this would be Saturday.
On Friday the 19th, the evening of Friday the 19th, we'll be doing ours on the 20th in the evening.
Right.
Okay. All right. Maybe that would work well. Maybe the teams would hang around this area, and they could get a twofer over the weekend. That might get us a better participation, because I think last year didn't we have 20? We had 20 signed up, but only 16 showed, right? As I recall.
No, I don't think there were that many shows, but yeah, certainly the number of carp that were taken out lake was quite disappointing. So.
Considering the money invested, absolutely. Thank you.
Any further discussion on that?
Well, yeah, I think we pushed for a nighttime event, so it's good to hear that that's what Thane is thinking. Hopefully it'll be more successful. I guess I'd be agreeable to funding prizes again this year, kind of contingent on what we see. I mean, if we get some significantly better results than last year, I guess then we think about it going forward. But I would say that if the results are like we have seen the last 2 years, maybe this is our last shot in the barrel here.
And how much are we looking at prize money, Diane, roughly?
I think roughly it's about $2,500.
Any further discussion?
I mean, I'm willing to give it one more shot, I guess, but it's not that, 2,500 again, like I said, is, can be directed in other CARP activities if it doesn't work out this year. Thank you.
Madam Chair, managers, I think that's a good idea to, we'll try to get a hold of them again and say that the managers want to make sure that we have X number of participants and that, that there's good visibility. So if it turns out there's like 6 teams or something, we simply don't want to be part of that.
That sounds good, Diane. All right, we will move on to our last item, 4.10, and it's a statement I have here from the managers, and it has to do with the closed workshop this afternoon on the district administrator's performance evaluation. It was a closed meeting. We talked about her review. So a statement that I have here in front of me from the managers is the Prior Lake Spring Lake Watershed Board of Managers evaluated District Administrator Diane Lynch on her job performance for the period of May 2016 to April 2017 and found that the District Administrator Lynch met or exceeded expectations for her performance in the areas of Board of Managers support, administration, personnel management, communication, and project coordination. So we thank you this year for your service, and we will be continuing next month on the final part of her evaluation. So thank you very much. You did an excellent job. The managers all felt that. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, manager.
Any other discussion items on that? Otherwise, we'll go on to the consent agenda. Item 5.0, consent agenda is considered as one business item, consists of routine administrative items or items not requiring discussion. Items can be removed from the consent agenda at the request of the board members, staff, or a member of the audience. Please state the items which you would like to remove for separate discussion. And it would be the meeting minutes of March 14th of the workshop and the CAC meetings of March 30th. Those would be the consent agenda items. Is there any discussion? Do I hear a motion to accept the consent agenda items?
So moved.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
All in favor? Any more further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Move on to the treasurer's report. Item 6.0, the first one will be the claims list, and there is an attachment, and that will be a vote.
Marianne, if I may just point out that the sequence of the attachments is a little bit out of order of the agenda. The claims list is actually page 57, and Chris's financial report is 56, and the treasurer's report is 55. So we're looking at the last page of the packet here is the claims list.
So those that go last are first. Okay, 57, the claims list.
I have a question, Madam President. The $20,000 for the bar engineering PLOC stabilization FEMA now, that's money we haven't been reimbursed for yet, right, Diane? Is that true?
Mr. Chair, Manager, or Madam Chair, Managers, that's correct. We are actually, we're not going to get reimbursed by FEMA for any of the work that we do on the bank erosion until it's all completed. So what we need to do next is apply for this money from the DNR grant that we got.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Madam Chair? Is the bio-based subscription appropriately labeled as a JPMOA cost, or would That'd be our district cost.
Oh, are we still on the claims list on page 57?
Yeah, yes, ma'am.
Madam Chair, Manager Hawley, no, that's in the wrong spot.
Okay, so the approval of this claims list should make a note to move that up into section 1, right? Okay.
Any further questions? Do I hear a motion to accept the claims list
Motion to accept the claims list
as corrected?
as corrected.
Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? The claims list has been approved. And then we go to the cash and investments. That's discussion only, 6.2, which then is on page 55.
So just a couple of comments there where our cash position is fairly solid, about $470,000 in the bank. Our first half levy from the county will be later in June. So we're in relatively good shape. 24%, as you can see in the brown shaded area. The district is about 20, we're 3 months into the year and about 24% spent, so we're pretty well tracking to plan here. As I mentioned, I mean, we talked about this last 2 months now. Our Northland Securities is, we've maintained a $300,000 cash position at Northland just as a contingency for anything unforeseen. The rest of it's in a bond ladder that goes out over a couple of years.
That's on page 55 for anyone who has the package.
So I guess I'd entertain any questions if anybody's got any specific.
4% of the JPA MOA and 21%, right?
Yeah, we're
For the
always,
watershed.
JPMOA never seems to be,
Right.
never seems to track to plan.
Thank you, Woody. We'll move to the 6.3 of the Treasurer's Report, the financial report, and that will be a discussion-only item also. On page 56. Are there any questions?
Man, if I may, just that, so this is the revised reporting based kind of tracking a little more closely to the budget for the year. And Chris is putting a little more time into it. Obviously, our expenditures for our accounting firm are going to be somewhat up this year in terms of the scale of this. But I think for myself, I know I'm quite pleased. This tracks really much better to the budget that's been approved.
Yeah, this looks very nice, very easy to read. That's a lot of hard work. Thank you guys for putting that together.
Chris and Amy did the work.
What did he give you any idea how much more the accounting cost would be for this better report?
I didn't hear anything. I don't know, Dan, did he give you any?
Madam Chair, managers, he said that it's going to go down because the biggest cost was just putting the numbers together and rejiggering the budget because we went from, 2 different styles of budgeting. So hopefully, it actually should be a easy movement from QuickBooks into this type of format. So I think that it won't last for very long. I think that he's getting the hang of it, and probably a month or 2, we should be right back on track.
So more about the non-recurring effort associated with getting this thing set up, I guess.
Yes, yeah.
All right, any other discussion on that? Otherwise, we'll just move right along to the upcoming meeting and event schedules. The CAC meeting on this coming Thursday, April 27th. the Spring Lake Association annual meeting, and boy, they put out a nice newsletter, and our administrator, Diane Lynch, had a nice article in there, as well as manager Fred Corrigan had a nice article in there. And there was even a little small article about the Carp tournament in there also. So that was a really very nice newsletter that they put out. And then the Clean Water Cleanup, Sunday, April 23rd at Sandpoint Beach. All volunteers, be sure to bring your rake and dress appropriately for the weather, but bring your rake, and we hope to see a lot of volunteers for the Clean Water Cleanup. There'll be coffee there in the morning and some lunch after we're done. So be sure to come out. And then the Carp tournament is scheduled for Saturday, May 20th. A night tournament, and it's run out of the Naughty Oar Marina. Those are, anybody else have any other upcoming events they want to make note of?
I have a couple things. First of all, I want to thank the Prior Lake Association for their donation to the watershed district, which we used quite appropriately to procure a radar system that can track the carp that were radio tagged 2 years ago. And this should lead to much quicker action when we find a school. And instead of having to have the contractor WSB come out, we can send our own people out, and we can get a action going much quicker this way. Also, Spring Lake Association is going to be giving us a donation, which we hardly want to thank, and especially to highlight Dan Kelly's terrific work as president of the Spring. I've been a member for a long time, and things have really taken a swing to the positive with Dan's leadership. So I want to be sure and thank him also. Also, for the Clean Water Cleanup, the alternate date in case of bad weather is the Sunday after, which is April 30th at 9:30. They'll be involved with that too. So. I guess that's it. Thank you.
Any further comments or questions? Otherwise, I'll take a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Motion to adjourn.
Do I hear a second? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Meeting adjourned, 8:03. Thank you very much.